Major Brian Shull felt the warning light before he heard the tone. His reconnaissance systems officer, Major Walter Watson, called it from the back seat. Missile launch. They were crossing Muammar Gaddafi's line of death over the Gulf of Sidra at 80,000 feet. It was mid-April 1986. Below them, Libyan surface-to-air batteries had just fired. The missiles were climbing. Shull did not turn. He did not dive. He pushed the throttles past their normal limit and accelerated. The aircraft was already traveling at more than 3,200 feet per second, faster than most rifle rounds. According to Shull's own account, he pushed the jet past its standard Mach 3.2 limit, reaching speeds he later described as the fastest the aircraft had ever been flown operationally. The missiles never reached them. The jet that carried Shull home that day had been built for exactly this moment. It was not a prototype. It was not experimental. It had been flying operational missions for nearly 2 decades, but to understand why it existed and what it had replaced, you need to go back 26 years to a morning when the fastest spy plane in the American arsenal fell out of the sky over the Soviet Union, and the pilot inside it became the most famous prisoner of the Cold War. Before we continue, I need to ask a small favor. Cold War Impact is a small Cold War and military history channel, and recently our reach and views have dropped significantly. If you enjoy well-researched history videos like this one, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing the video. Every interaction helps the channel reach new viewers and allows me to keep making these deep dive history documentaries. Now, back to the story. On May 1st, 1960, CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers took off from Peshawar, Pakistan, in a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft designated Article 360. His mission, codenamed Grand Slam, was the deepest planned overflight of the Soviet Union ever attempted. The route would carry him across the entire country to a landing strip in Bodo, Norway. He was cruising at roughly 70,500 feet, an altitude that for 4 years had kept the U-2 beyond the reach of every Soviet interceptor and every anti-aircraft gun on the planet. It was not beyond reach anymore. Near the city of Sverdlovsk, a Soviet S-75 missile battery commanded by Major Mikhail Voronov locked onto the aircraft and fired. Traditional accounts put the total number of missiles launched that day at 14, though the exact figure remains debated among historians. What is not debated is the result. A detonation close enough to Powers shattered the tail assembly. The U-2 tumbled out of control. Powers could not reach the self-destruct mechanism. He manually released the canopy, separated from the wreckage, and parachuted into Soviet territory. He was captured within minutes. One of the missiles fired that morning also struck a Soviet MiG-19 that had been scrambled to intercept the U-2. Its pilot, Senior Lieutenant Sergei Safronov, was killed by his own country's air defenses. The Soviets had destroyed their own fighter trying to reach a plane they had spent 4 years unable to touch. The weapon that ended the U-2's reign was the S-75 Divina, known in the West as the SA-2 guideline. It had been developed under the chief designer Pyotr Grushin beginning in 1953 and entered operational service in 1957. The missile was over 10 meters long. Western pilots in Vietnam would later call it the flying telephone pole. It could reach altitudes above 80,000 feet and exceed Mach 3 on its way up. The Soviets had tracked the U-2 from the very first overflight on July 4, 1956. They knew the routes. They watched every pass over Leningrad, over Moscow, over their most sensitive nuclear installations. They simply could not reach the aircraft. Premier Khrushchev was privately furious and ordered his engineers to close the gap. When the S-75 finally achieved the altitude to engage, the U-2's entire survival doctrine, fly higher than anything can touch you, collapsed in a single morning over Sverdlovsk. The Paris summit, scheduled 2 weeks later, collapsed with it. Khrushchev demanded an apology. President Eisenhower refused. The brief thaw in Cold War relations was over. Manned American overflights of the Soviet Union were permanently suspended. But what Washington did not reveal was that the aircraft built to replace the U-2 was already under construction in a facility in Burbank, California. And the titanium it was built from had been purchased through a network of CIA front companies from the Soviet Union itself. Moscow had no idea it was supplying the raw material for the aircraft designed to spy on it. The man who designed the U-2 was the same man who designed its successor. Clarence Kelly Johnson, head of Lockheed's Advanced Development Projects Division, known as the Skunk Works, had understood the U-2's vulnerability before the Soviets proved it. By late 1957, his team had begun work on an aircraft that would solve the missile problem not by flying higher, but by flying faster. The 12th design iteration, internally called the A-12, became the foundation for a new kind of reconnaissance platform. The challenge was heat. At speeds above Mach 3, air friction raised the skin temperature past 500 degrees Fahrenheit. No aluminum airframe could survive it. Johnson's answer was titanium. More than 90% of the aircraft's structure was built from it. Titanium was scarce and brutally difficult to machine. The world's largest exporter was the Soviet Union. Ben Rich, Johnson's propulsion engineer and eventual successor as Skunk Works director, later described how the CIA set up dummy companies to buy Soviet titanium without revealing its purpose. The Soviets sold it willingly. The A-12 first flew at Groom Lake, Nevada in April 1962 with Lockheed test pilot Louis Schalk at the controls. Powered by two Pratt & Whitney J-58 engines, it reached a sustained speed above Mach 3.2 at 90,000 feet. The J-58 was not a conventional jet engine. Above Mach 2, it functioned as a ramjet, bleeding compressor air directly into the afterburner. It burned a special low-volatility fuel called JP7, which required a chemical igniter called triethylborane to start. Every ignition produced a distinctive green flash from the exhaust. But the A-12 was still in testing when the SA-2 claimed another life and nearly triggered a nuclear war. On October 27, 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, United States Air Force Major Rudolph Anderson Jr. took off from McCoy Air Force Base in Florida on his 6th reconnaissance mission over Cuba. Flying near 72,000 feet, his U-2 was struck by an S-75 missile fired near Baines. Shrapnel punctured his pressure suit. He was likely killed instantly. The Soviet battery commander had fired without authorization from Moscow. Anderson became the only combat fatality of the crisis and the first recipient of the Air Force Cross. His death pushed Kennedy and Khrushchev closer to the brink than any other single event during those 13 days. The aircraft built to replace the U-2 was still not ready. American pilots were still dying in a plane that the enemy had learned how to kill. The Air Force variant of Johnson's design became the SR-71. It was longer than the A-12, carried more fuel, and added a second seat for a reconnaissance systems officer. President Lyndon Johnson first publicly revealed the Blackbird program on February 29, 1964. The first SR-71 flew on December 22nd of that year. Piloted by Bob Gilliland from Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale, California. It entered operational service in January 1966 with the 9th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing at Beale Air Force Base. When the jets deployed to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, local residents thought the long black aircraft resembled the habu, a venomous pit viper native to the islands. The crews adopted the name. The SR-71's defense was not stealth. It had a radar cross-section of roughly 10 square meters and a massive heat signature that Soviet radar could track. Its defense was simpler and more brutal than any electronic countermeasure. At Mach 3.2 and 85,000 feet, the aircraft crossed a missile battery's entire engagement envelope before the weapon could climb high enough to intercept. The Blackbird moved at roughly 36 miles per minute. The standard evasive procedure, if a launch was detected, was to accelerate. That was it. Outrun the fire. The first operational SR-71 sortie flew on March 21st, 1968, from Kadena, with Major Jerome O'Malley and Major Edward Payne. Within months, the Blackbird was flying regular missions over North Vietnam, directly into the densest surface-to-air missile network on Earth. On July 26, 1968, Reconnaissance Systems Officer Major Jerry Crew was flying with pilot Major Tony Bevacqua over the Hanoi and Haiphong corridor when his electronic countermeasures panel lit up in sequence. Search, tracking, launch. Briefers had told the crews that the SA-2's total flight time was 58 seconds. There was no time for maneuvering during the sensor pass. Speed alone carried them through. Mission cameras later confirmed 2 missiles had been fired. Neither came close. It kept happening. Colonel Richard Graham, a veteran SR-71 pilot, documented that over the course of the Vietnam War, North Vietnamese batteries fired approximately 800 surface-to-air missiles at the Blackbird. Not one scored a hit. Pilots reported missiles passing as close as 150 yards from the aircraft, launched without radar guidance in desperate attempts to catch a target, moving faster than the weapons sent to kill it. By 1981, Kelly Johnson himself stated publicly that more than 1,000 missiles had been launched at the Blackbird across all theaters of operation. The total across the aircraft's full service life is estimated at several thousand. The confirmed result never changed: 0 hits, 0 combat losses. In July 1976, an SR-71 set altitude and speed records that still stand today. 85,068 feet in sustained level flight, 2,193 miles per hour over a straight course. 32 SR-71s were built. 12 were lost in accidents over the program's lifespan. Not a single one was ever brought down by enemy fire. Francis Gary Powers did not share in any of what followed. He was exchanged on February 10, 1962 on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin, traded for Soviet intelligence officer Rudolf Abel. He returned to the United States to a cold reception. Many in the intelligence community questioned why he had not destroyed the aircraft. He was quietly cleared, but never fully restored. He worked for a time as a U-2 test pilot at Lockheed, then took a job flying a television news helicopter in Los Angeles. On August 1, 1977, his helicopter ran out of fuel and crashed in Encino, California. He was 47 years old. 2 CIA pilots died flying the A-12 before it was retired. Walt Ray in 1967. Jack Weeks on June 5, 1968, when his aircraft disappeared over the open waters of the Western Pacific. Their names did not appear in any public record for decades. The Air Force retired the SR-71 on November 22, 1989. On its final flight to the Smithsonian on March 6, 1990, it set 4 speed records, including a crossing from Los Angeles to Washington in 64 minutes and 20 seconds. Congress briefly reactivated the program in the mid-1990s, partly because intelligence officials regretted losing the Blackbird's capability during the Gulf War. The last SR-71 flight of any kind took place on October 9, 1999 under NASA operation. The U-2, the aircraft the Blackbird was built to replace, remains in active service with the United States Air Force today. The question the SR-71 answered in 1968, what happens when one side fields a platform faster than anything sent to destroy it, is still the defining question in aerial reconnaissance. Hypersonic missiles, satellite tracking networks, and autonomous drones have replaced the flying telephone poles that chased the Blackbird over Hanoi. The speeds have changed. The equation has not. And the reason the United States maintained unbroken strategic intelligence coverage across 3 decades of the Cold War traces back to a single design truth that Kelly Johnson understood before anyone else. If they can track you, if they can target you, if they can launch against you, the only answer that matters is to be faster than the fire.